If you're studying military strategy and don't understand the September 2022 Kharkiv Counteroffensive, you're missing one of the most brilliant tactical masterstrokes in modern warfare. This operation wasn't just another battle in the Russia-Ukraine war, it was a textbook example of how superior planning, deception, and execution can overcome massive numerical disadvantages. What happened in those 6 explosive days from September 6th to 11th, 2022 should be studied in every military academy for the next century. Ukraine didn't just win a battle, it demonstrated how a smaller, more agile force could systematically dismantle a supposedly superior enemy through pure strategic genius. It was David versus Goliath for the 21st century. The numbers alone, which we'll discuss a bit more later, are staggering enough to make any military strategist take notice, but the methods behind Ukraine's success reveal something far more important. Russia's military doctrine at the time was fundamentally broken, and Ukraine's approach represents the future of modern warfare. To understand the magnitude of Ukraine's victory, you need to grasp just how favorable the situation appeared for Russian forces in summer 2022. Russian forces had captured the strategically vital city of Izium in early April, establishing it as a major forward operating base with as many as 24 battalion tactical groups, numbering approximately 18,000 troops stationed in and around the city. This wasn't just any military outpost. Izium would go on to serve as a critical logistics hub for Russian operations throughout eastern Ukraine, with railway lines running all the way from Crimea across the Kerch Bridge through Russian territory towards the area around Kharkiv. Control of Izium meant that Russia could efficiently supply its entire northern front and use the city as a staging ground for further advances toward the key Ukrainian cities of Slovyansk and Kramatorsk. But here's where Russian strategic thinking proved catastrophically flawed. Throughout July and August 2022, Ukrainian and Russian media both parroted claims of a Ukrainian counteroffensive in the Kherson Oblast. By August, the number of Russian battalions in Izium had decreased by at least one-half amid a redeployment of Russian forces to Kherson. This wasn't accidental. Ukrainian General Staff used information operations by harnessing the mainstream media to talk about a major counteroffensive in the south, that being the Kherson front line, when at the same time they were shifting troops and equipment to the Kharkiv region. It was classic misdirection. It proved to be especially useful in the context of Russia's military strategy at the time. With the military used to making slow but steady advances throughout the region, Russia believed it had the impetus in any ground battle. This meant Russian officers likely had no contingency plans for what to do if they found themselves outnumbered or in a counteroffensive, especially the ones who were stationed in an area that shouldn't have had a lot of military action in the first place. And then on August 29, 2022, the Ukrainian Southern Command announced that the long-anticipated counteroffensive in the Kherson region had started, creating exactly the response Ukraine wanted. Russia was then frantically redeploying its best units to the south, leaving Kharkiv defended by second-rate forces. And while Russian commanders were falling for Ukraine's strategic deception, one man was quietly preparing for what would become one of the most effective military operations in modern history. By September 2022, Alexander Syrsky, who had been in charge of the defense of Kyiv at the beginning of the invasion and later received the title of Hero of Ukraine for his service, was appointed to command the Ukrainian land forces in Kharkiv Oblast. The counteroffensive was performed under his command, and Syrsky is considered to be its architect. Syrsky's genius lay not just in tactical planning, but in understanding the fundamental weaknesses of Russian military doctrine. Since spring 2022, Syrsky had been considering the possibility of an offensive operation north of Balaklia and Izium, which would threaten Russian forces in both cities with encirclement. In the summer, Ukrainian General Staff called for its commanders to propose diversionary operations to draw Russian forces away from the defense of Kherson, and Syrsky submitted his idea. But Syrsky's plan went far beyond tactical considerations. Syrsky's plan called for a fast-paced advance that avoided direct attacks on towns and cities to avoid casualties. This approach demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of modern warfare principles. Momentum and psychological impact matter more than grinding urban battles. The preparation phase revealed meticulous attention to detail that would prove decisive. Just before the operation was launched, every attacking brigade was supplied with at least 8 M777 howitzers. This wasn't random, and it ensured that Ukrainian forces would have an overwhelming firepower advantage at the point of contact, enabling a rapid breakthrough of Russian defensive lines, which meant the stage was set for a full-on offensive. On September 6, 2022, Ukrainian forces launched the attack, advancing into Russian-occupied territory and taking the invaders by surprise. Having concentrated their force about 10 miles northwest of Balakilia, Ukrainian troops launched a counteroffensive in the Kharkiv Oblast, which drove Russian forces back to the left bank of the Donets and Serednaya Balakaya rivers. The Ukrainian forces involved were Ukrainian Special Forces plus tanks, armored personnel carriers, and troops from the 92nd Mechanized Brigade. The initial breakthrough was devastating. Ukraine's 25th Airborne Brigade started its advance just past 3:30 a.m. on September 6th, only after Ukraine was launching artillery fire on Russian positions for hours on end. On the first day alone, units of the 25th Brigade advanced at least 11 miles, reaching the village of Volokiv Yar, which was a strategic road junction that connected towns in the region. This allowed Ukraine to use roads for the bulk of its offensive, greatly increasing the pace of its approach. The speed of the Russian collapse in Kharkiv exposed fundamental flaws in Russian military thinking that continue to plague their forces today. As Russian troops were reportedly fleeing from Ukrainian forces in northeast Ukraine, Russians in Moscow were partying, celebrating the 875th anniversary of the city's founding. This disconnect between reality on the battlefield and perception in Moscow revealed the depth of Russia's institutional problems. By September 9th, Ukrainian troops had advanced nearly 31 miles into Russian-occupied territory, retaking towns like Balaklaya and Shevchenkova and reaching Kupiansk by September 10th. Each of these had been heavily fortified Russian positions, yet they fell with minimal resistance. The psychological impact on Russian forces was immediate and catastrophic. Some analysts went so far as to suggest that it was the first time since World War II that whole Russian units had been lost in a single battle. Ukrainian soldiers recalled how Russian forces fled so hastily that they abandoned not only vast amounts of ammunition, but also newly deployed military equipment. Many of these became Ukrainian trophies, with tanks and artillery integrated into Ukrainian service. The extent of Russia's equipment losses was staggering. Between September 6th and 11th alone, the Ukrainians claimed to have killed 2,850 Russian soldiers and to have destroyed up to 590 pieces of military equipment, including 86 tanks, 158 armored combat vehicles, 106 artillery systems, and 159 vehicles. Meanwhile, 46 other equipment systems were also lost, including 6 planes and 7 helicopters. According to Oryx, they also captured an additional 129 pieces of military equipment. But the most damaging aspect for Russia wasn't the equipment losses, it was the complete breakdown of command and control. Ukrainian forces used HIMARS to destroy Russian ammunition depots and cripple Russian military leadership, two resources that are very difficult for Russia to replace and are necessary for its military to be effective. While the tactical victories were impressive, the strategic implications of Ukraine's Kharkiv operation were what truly made it a masterclass in modern warfare. The Institute for the Study of War, or ISW, noted that the rapid pace of the Ukrainian counteroffensive was disrupting the Russian army's long-held ground lines of communication, used to supply the Russian army in northern Luhansk Oblast, and would lead to a serious hindrance to Russia's operations. This wasn't just about capturing territory, it was about systematically dismantling Russia's ability to conduct coherent military operations across the entire Eastern Front. The rapid advance continued, with Ukrainian forces recapturing Izium and securing access to the Oskil River. Reports indicated that by September 11th, Ukrainian forces had penetrated Russian lines to a depth of up to 45 miles, reclaiming over 3,000 square kilometers of territory. The capture of Kupiansk was particularly devastating for Russian logistics. As another railway hub, its loss meant that Russia wouldn't be able to move equipment and infantry in and out of Izium, leaving it practically defenseless in the grand scheme of the invasion. Additionally, without reliable supply lines, the entire logistics infrastructure surrounding the Kharkiv area occupied by Russia could be threatened by Ukraine. The Russian soldiers would need to move without most of their equipment and supplies, leaving them powerless against incoming Ukrainian forces. And the rapid pace of advancement meant that Ukraine was using pincer strikes to isolate Russian units from one another and prevent coordinated retreats. The Russian Ministry of Defense responded to these developments by claiming that Russian forces in Balaklaya and Izium area would regroup in the Donetsk area to achieve the stated goals of the special military operation to liberate Donbass. This was military speak for a humiliating retreat, and everyone knew it. After that initial assault to cripple the Russian logistics and liberate vital strategic outposts in the area, the rest of the counteroffensive was relatively smooth. After Russia formally announced that it would withdraw, most of the forces left the region, going northeast to the Oskil River, which Russia considered a vital point of conflict, as the river created a natural boundary that Ukraine had to cross to liberate the entire region. Russian forces retreated to Liman, which is another vital hub east of the Oskil River in Donetsk, supplying the Kharkiv region from the Russian side of the conflict. However, some sources suggest that Ukraine was able to cross the river as early as September 13th and controlled vital outposts on that shore that would serve as staging grounds for the Liman invasion. In the second half of September, Russian forces in Liman started facing a deteriorating situation that their command structure seemed incapable of addressing. Ukrainian forces had systematically captured nearby settlements, quickly approaching the city proper. At this point, the supply lines that were once vital for Liman became Russia's weakness, as Ukraine could approach the city from both the Donetsk and Kharkiv sides. Furthermore, Ukraine was poised to gain control over the supply lines from Liman to Luhansk, which would see the city cut off entirely from Russian supplies. By September 30th, Ukrainian forces had closed in on the city after crossing the Siversky Donets River, advancing along Liman's southern and eastern flanks while capturing land northwest of the settlement, allowing Ukrainian forces to cut off the only road left supplying the occupying forces from the north. On October 1st, Ukrainian forces entered Liman, reportedly encircling up to 5,000 Russian troops, leading to significant casualties for the Russian military. The recapture of Liman was the effective ending of the campaign. However, it could be argued that as soon as Russia announced the withdrawal on September 11th, Ukraine had basically won. The Center for Strategic and International Studies considers the counteroffensive to have lasted from September 6th to 13th, which is when Ukraine crossed the Oskil River into Donetsk and practically fully recaptured the Kharkiv Oblast. In that period, the forces advanced about 4.6 miles per day. The CSIS considers this the fastest offensive operation going back over 100 years of war, showcasing just how impressive Ukraine's strategy was. The entire operation was nothing less than an eye-opener. The Kharkiv counteroffensive revealed a fundamental truth that military strategists had long suspected but never seen demonstrated so clearly. Numerical superiority means nothing if your doctrine is fundamentally flawed. Russia entered this battle with supposedly overwhelming advantages. They had more troops, more artillery, more tanks, and more aircraft. They had been occupying and fortifying these positions for months. They had the strategic initiative and could choose where and when to fight. Yet they lost catastrophically in less than a week. The problem wasn't just tactical, it was systemic. While Western weapons were necessary for the success of Ukraine, skillful logistics and execution of the campaign played a decisive role in the lightning success. Ukraine's victory came from superior planning, better intelligence, more flexible command structures, and soldiers who understood they were fighting for their survival. Russian doctrine, built around centralized command and overwhelming firepower, proved completely inadequate against Ukrainian forces that could adapt, improvise, and exploit opportunities in real time. On September 10th, representatives from the British Ministry of Defense suggested the Russian army had not practically defended most of the territories recaptured by Ukraine. This wasn't Russian incompetence per se, it was the inevitable result of a military system designed for a different kind of war. Russian forces were optimized for fighting NATO in massive conventional battles, namely on their own ground, with air forces and land units combined to create layered defenses. In that scenario, Russia would be fighting a more defensive war, where it had the field advantage and air defenses that were designed to counter expensive Western weapons. However, that doctrine was decidedly not designed for defending territory against an adaptive, technology-enabled opponent fighting for its existence. Perhaps the most sophisticated aspect of Ukraine's Kharkiv operation was how they manipulated Russian decision-making through masterful information warfare. The subterfuge of using social media posts as well as mainstream media to showcase false military plans wasn't a particularly novel strategy as far as war planning goes, but the use of the internet and mass-produced news that can't be verified as easily is technically the hallmark of the 21st century. Ukraine leveraged this to reduce the perceived level of threat Russia would face in the Kharkiv region following its successful capture. These actions of the Ukrainians also highlighted the potential lack of intelligence gathering and reconnaissance from the Russian side. If you're making war strategy based on what someone says over social media, you might need to reconsider how good a war planner you are. These intelligence failures are unlikely to be incidental. They were simply the result of a command structure that was rigid and prioritized fixed scenarios and propaganda over adaptive planning. Lower officers in Russia, specifically those on the front lines, don't seem to have a lot of say when it comes to strategizing in their immediate area. Instead, the plans come from above, where the upper echelon seems to be so detached from the reality of the war that it took nearly 2 years of it to acknowledge it being one, rather than just a special military operation. So when Ukrainian media began discussing a southern offensive, Russian commanders simply didn't verify these claims through independent intelligence gathering. They accepted the narrative and redeployed accordingly. The success of the Kharkiv counteroffensive had implications far beyond the immediate battlefield. Ukraine's successes in Kharkiv Oblast served as a crucial confidence boost for Kyiv, which is increasingly reliant on its Western allies for military aid. More importantly, it demonstrated to Western military planners that Ukraine wasn't just capable of defending territory, they could conduct sophisticated offensive operations that rivaled anything NATO forces had achieved in recent decades. According to Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba, Ukraine's counteroffensives showcase that the Ukrainian military could potentially end the war faster and in Ukraine's favor with more Western weapons. a statement that President Volodymyr Zelensky echoed on September 12th. This wasn't Ukrainian propaganda, but a realistic assessment based on demonstrated battlefield performance. The operation's success also had immediate regional implications. Clashes on the Armenia-Azerbaijan border erupted shortly after Russia suffered setbacks in a counteroffensive, weakening its force projection in the region. When a supposed military superpower suffers such a humiliating defeat, it emboldens challenges to its influence everywhere. If you're studying military strategy and don't understand the Kharkiv counteroffensive, you're missing critical lessons about modern warfare. Lesson 1: Deception remains the ultimate force multiplier. Ukraine's information operation was more effective than any weapon system in determining the battle's outcome. By manipulating Russian troop deployments through strategic deception, Ukraine created the conditions for victory before the first shot was fired. Lesson 2: Centralized command is a critical vulnerability. Russian forces couldn't adapt to rapidly changing battlefield conditions because their doctrine required authorization from higher command for tactical decisions. Ukrainian forces could exploit opportunities in real time. Lesson 3: Logistics beats firepower. Ukraine didn't win because it had more tanks or artillery. It won because they systematically destroyed Russia's ability to supply and command its forces. Lesson 4: Technology amplifies competence but doesn't create it. Western weapons were important, but Ukraine's victory came from superior planning, training, and execution. Technology is only as effective as the people using it. Lesson 5: Speed of decision-making is crucial. In modern warfare, the side that can observe, orient, decide, and act faster will win, regardless of numerical advantages. To understand how remarkable this achievement was, consider the historical context. CSIS's study also highlighted 3 historical operations from the past century. Ukraine's Kharkiv operation moved faster than the legendary German Blitzkrieg operations. It outpaced Israeli advances in the Yom Kippur War, which were considered among the most successful armored operations in modern history. This wasn't just a tactical victory, it was a demonstration of operational art at the highest level. The Kharkiv counteroffensive didn't just change the trajectory of the Russia-Ukraine war, it fundamentally altered how military strategists think about modern conflict. The operation demonstrated that in the 21st century, the side with the better information, faster decision-making, and more adaptive doctrine will defeat numerically superior but doctrinally rigid opponents. The New York Times reported that the fall of the strategically important city of Izium in Ukraine's east is the most devastating blow to Russia since its humiliating retreat from Kyiv. But this assessment, while accurate, understated the broader implications. By recapturing one of the vital regions that was taken all the way back in April, Ukraine absolutely demolished Russia's momentum. Previous plans that depended on logistics going through Kharkiv would have to be redrawn. The casualties suffered by Russia had to be recouped through conscription and campaigning efforts, both of which would put more strain on Russia's already problematic demographics. The lesson is clear. In modern warfare, competence beats quantity, adaptability beats firepower, and superior planning beats superior numbers. If you don't understand how Ukraine achieved this victory, you don't understand how wars will be fought in the future. Thanks for watching. To learn about how Ukraine managed to bolster its military to achieve this victory and go on to become one of the world's most competent forces, watch this video. And if you want to stay up to date with global geopolitics, subscribe to The Military Show for daily videos.